In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the CloudKit dashboard, which is kind of like our command center for CloudKit. So if you go to developer.apple.com, hopefully you're familiar with this site. You're probably gonna have to log in. I skipped that phase here, but on the left, you'll see a CloudKit dashboard, right? Move it up, there we go. Click on that. And then you'll say, go to CloudKit dashboard, go ahead and do that. Okay, so here we are, but be careful if you've used CloudKit before because you'll have all your other containers that you created. You'll see this is, SeanAllen.OneShot. This was an app I was thinking about making, like literally my first app ever. So probably back in 2015, I created this. So be careful if you're creating a ton of containers because you can't delete them. That kind of sucks. So you can see some of the other containers. Here we have dub-dub-grub beta. That is when I built the app the first time. This dub-dub-grub is the one we're building together right now. So I'll click on the one that we're building together right now, and you'll notice you don't see anything under production. But if I click on dub-dub-grub beta, which is what we're going to walk through because this has everything built. We haven't built anything yet in our dub-dub-grub. You'll see this has production. So that's the first thing I want to mention. You can work in a development environment and do all your testing and all that stuff. And then you have to, this little gear at the top, you have to deploy any changes to your schema to production. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll come back to that. So anyway, in development here, you see some things that you can use. We'll start with usage in the lower right. Data and schema are the big things we're going to use right now. So I'm saving them for last. Let's click on usage, right? This is the beta for dub-dub-grub. You can see we have a couple users right here. This is, again, I launched to about 15 beta testers from the Slack community. So you can see the activity there. And then, requests per second. Basically, I'm not going to go through every single one, but you get all kinds of like data, database storage, asset storage, right? You get all kinds of data for your app and usage. And now, quick way to navigate is this drop down here. So now if I go to telemetry, this is like the performance of your app. So I don't want private databases because remember, dub-dub-grub doesn't use private database, uses public database. So I'll go to the public database. Now you can see all my operations. So you can see how many requests I got. So you can kind of tell like when I release the beta. So you can kind of see how many requests your app is making. So kind of the usage of your app. Server latency, if you're making any requests where it's taking a very long time for the server, you can kind of diagnose that. Now, by the way, this data is kind of muddy just because it's only like 10 beta testers over like 3 days. But anyway, you can see like the error counts. It'll tell you like what error. There's a not found error. There's an access denied error. I got it from 2 users on May 14th. And again, this was the beta. Average request size. You can see if you're making any abnormally large requests, like what's going on. Again, the telemetry and the usage are just ways to, I'm going to click this upper left CloudKit icon to get back to here. But yeah, telemetry and usage, just kind of like stats for your app. Now let's dive into schema and data. Well, let's talk about logs real quick. So logs, as you can imagine, nobody's using dub-dub-grub right now. So we'll go to historical and I'll change the date back to like the 18th, kind of when I was doing the beta. Hit return for the start date, and then this is going to load just some logs. So if you're familiar with any backend developer where you're like checking the logs to see what's going on, this is what'll pull that up. So here you can see just a bunch of like operations. I'm going to pick one at random. Pick this one. You hit the drop down. You get all kinds of information about it. See, it was a record query in the public database. Tells you how server latency, what iPhone it was on. By the way, I know there is no iPhone 13. There's certain iPhone codes. I can't remember exactly what that one is, but yeah, that's not an iPhone 13. There's nobody from the future doing this. But anyway, you can get just data, on the logs. Should you choose, should something go wrong, you can kind of figure that out. Okay, so back to the main screen. Let's talk about our schema. I'll show you what this is. We're actually going to build our schema in the next video, but I'm going to explain it now. So this is what it's going to look like if we click on it. You can see in the upper left, we have record types, and you can see we have DDG locate. Well, we'll start from the top. We have users, right? So you get a user by default from CloudKit, right? Record name, created by whatever. This is the record that gets created with that automatic authentication, right? It connects the iCloud account. And you can add your custom fields to this. Right now, we just have a user profile that's a reference. Remember, references were how you can connect 2 records. The reason I had to do this was because it's weird with CloudKit. You can't build like your user object on this and make it queryable. The reason we need to query users is because we're querying all the users that are checked into certain locations. So if your app doesn't have to query users like that, you're fine just adding custom fields to this user. However, because I needed something that was queryable, that's why we had to create this DDG profile as kind of like a proxy to a user. Just a little bit of a workaround you have to deal with in CloudKit if you want your users to be queryable. There's plenty of situations where your users will never be queryable, but wanted to point that out. That's why we did that. And if that kind of didn't make sense, that was confusing, when we build the app, I'll explain it because we'll be in the weeds and it'll make sense then, I promise you, even if it didn't quite make sense now. But let's go to DDG location because this is our first kind of like custom object, right? Our location. And you can see we have things like address, city, state, zip, address, street. So this is the beta, right? Something to note, once you push something to production, you can't come back in and delete fields when I push my database to production. And that's for backwards compatibility reasons. But so when I was like testing things and changing things, I changed how I showed the address, but I still had these other fields, so I couldn't go back and delete them. So my beta database is a little messy. Ours will be cleaner, just in case you're wondering why you see all that. But you can see, banner asset here is an asset, a CK asset, right? Name is a string. Now let me show you if we were to add like another field, you can see you can be an asset, bytes, location, double, int, reference, and then you see list next to it. You can add an array of locations, right? An array of strings. So we're going to create our schema again in the next video, but I wanted to show you kind of like what it looks like when it's all done. This is what we're going to build. So this is all your record types, right? This is basically all your objects, right? Here's our profile, avatar, bio, company name, first name is checked in, which is a reference to the location. Remember I talked about that. So that's our schema. And then if I go to data, okay, so here, remember, you have to pick your database, right? Remember, our records live in databases. So I get to pick what database do I want to see here, right? You get the private database, shared database, public. Well, in DDG, our stuff is in the public database, right? So make sure you're on the public database. And here, I want to query all of our DDG locations. If you're following me along on your CloudKit dashboard, you're not going to have any of this stuff because we haven't built it, but I'm going to query records. And these are all of our restaurants, our locations, right? I had to manually enter this data. So I'm going to click this drop down arrow and you can see we get the address, the phone number, the banner asset. If you're keen, you'll know that 500 kilobytes for the asset is a lot. That's pretty big. I have optimized our assets to be smaller. Long story short, they were PNGs. I needed to make them JPEGs to be much smaller. And by the way, when you're building these assets, you want to keep that in mind. Like any images or anything like that, you want to be as small as possible, right? Because you want very fast network calls. If you have huge images for your assets, your network calls are going to be slower. Your app's going to be clunky. So keep these as small as possible without compromising like quality. You don't want pixelated image, right? So there's a fine line. But anyway, in case someone noticed like, holy crap, 500 kilobytes, we did fix that. But yeah, you can see this is the Mezcal restaurant, all the stuff, and then these are all the restaurants. So how you add a record, which we're going to do in a future video, it's pretty tedious, but you hit add record, you get this pane on the right, and then you can see you can add, description, latitude, longitude, name, right? So I do have a spreadsheet that you're going to be able to copy and paste from, so it's not all manual typing. It's not going to be that bad, and there are only 8 of them, but it is manual data entry. And, this is part of creating your own data set. Remember, we talked about part of the value of something like DubDubGrub and a niche product is being able to curate your data, exactly how you want it. So kind of the trade-off to that is, well, you're the one that's got to enter the data. So that is records. And again, back to schema, that's where record types are. And, again, back to data, we can look through our databases. I'm kind of going through this to reiterate the core concepts of CloudKit, how you have, containers, databases, record types, records, all that stuff. And then CK operations, like we talked about, is actually this query. Like under the hood, it is running a CK fetch operation to fetch all this stuff. So that is a brief rundown of the dashboard. Like I mentioned, once you have your development all done and you're ready to push it to test flight, like we're going to do towards the end of the project, again, just hit this little thing, deploy schema to production. It'll take a little bit. You'll get this production version. And now, okay, let's look. My production data. Well, let me go back to development. You can have this just to show you here. I want to fetch my DDG profile, hit query records. Okay, there's only 2 of them, right? This is creator view. I made one for my creator view iCloud account. And then Sean, my iCloud account. And the profile, remember, was in the public database. That's not anybody's personal stuff. That's not our user record. That's our profile record. But this is why I had to put it out to test flight to beta test. And kind of a tricky thing with CloudKit is like, I can't really create mock users because they're attached to the iCloud account. So if you had 10 iCloud accounts or like family members, yeah, you could test 10 users. But I wanted to push it to production so I could test other users, like downloading the app, using it, checking in, checking out. Like I wanted to test that. So I had to put it up on test flight. So now if we're querying our DDG profiles, if I go to production, this one should have all the beta testers in it. Yep, and here we go. I'll just pick one. I don't think there's any private information here. Yep, here's Jason Mitchell. He always gets featured somehow in my courses. But yeah, you can see Jason Mitchell, company self, iOS developer, da-da-da. Okay, so here's the thing. Like I mentioned, the avatar, 4.7 megabytes. I'm not doing a good job in our photo picker optimizing the profiles, right? Because when we open up the photo picker, we're in people's camera rolls and they can have these huge, heavy images. Well, later on in the course, we need to work on like compressing that image because we don't want, downloading 5 megabytes for his profile picture. And that's not Jason's fault. That's our fault on the developer side of not optimizing the image. We're going to get there. But yeah, so these are all my beta testers in production. So that's how you can kind of, look through your CloudKit dashboard to kind of navigate through your app. And again, to clarify, if you're using a private database, as a developer in this dashboard, you can't see anything in the user's private database, right? That's why it's private. You can only see stuff in the public and maybe the shared database depending. So that's the overview of CloudKit dashboard. If you're a little confused, don't worry. We're gonna be in here building our schema, adding our data, checking things. You'll get plenty of practice with this. Okay, on to the next video where we're gonna actually start building the schema.